Right now you feel late, pressured, almost panicked, but soon, without effort, you will feel calm, certain. And when calm arrives, the world begins to move. The feeling of being behind does not arrive quietly, it arrives as pressure. It appears the moment you look outward and measure your life against a calendar that was never designed for the soul. The modern world trains the mind to believe that progress must follow visible timelines, that certain ages must carry certain achievements, and that if something has not happened by now, something has gone wrong. This pressure does not come from truth. It comes from comparison. It is born from watching other people's highlights, borrowed milestones and borrowed clocks, and mistaking them for universal law. Over time, this creates a false urgency that feels personal, even though it is entirely manufactured. Neville Goddard corrected this illusion with a precision that feels almost unsettling at first. He taught that every desire has an appointed hour, not a vague someday, not a hopeful maybe, but a precise moment already woven into the fabric of consciousness. This appointed hour is not decided by age, effort, or social approval. It is not negotiated by anxiety. It exists independent of your worry, and it cannot be rushed by force. When Neville spoke of this, he was not offering comfort. He was describing a law. A seed planted today does not argue with the calendar, and it does not apologize for taking time. It grows according to an inner intelligence that knows exactly when it must break the surface. What the mind calls late is nothing more than a judgment formed by impatience. It is not a spiritual diagnosis, and it is not evidence of failure. The intellect looks at time as a ruler, a measuring stick that determines worth. But life itself does not operate by that metric. Consciousness does not age. Awareness does not decay. The state you occupy is what matters, not how long you believe you have been occupying it. To say something is late is to assume that time creates outcomes, when in truth, time only reveals what has already been assumed. Neville often used the analogy of fruit to dissolve this anxiety. A fruit cannot ripen by panic, and it cannot sweeten itself by fear. No amount of urgency can command it to mature faster than its nature allows. If you shake the branch, you do not accelerate ripeness. You only risk losing the fruit before it is ready. Faith in this sense is not blind optimism. Faith is alignment with the natural intelligence that knows when a thing must appear. Anxiety interferes with this process, not because it delays the appointed hour, but because it convinces the mind that something is wrong when nothing is. Modern language now echoes this same principle through a different doorway. In neuroscience and physics, there is an understanding that coherence often forms invisibly before it expresses itself suddenly. Long periods of apparent stillness precede abrupt reorganization. What looks like delay is often preparation, at a level the senses cannot detect. Breakthroughs do not announce themselves gradually. They emerge when internal alignment reaches a threshold. What the world calls overnight success is usually the final moment of a process that has been unfolding quietly for years. This is where the rare ones separate themselves without ever trying to stand apart. They do not interpret silence as rejection. They do not interpret invisibility as absence. They do not measure progress by applause or timestamps. Instead, they remain inwardly loyal to what they have assumed to be true, even when nothing on the surface appears to confirm it. This loyalty is not dramatic. It is calm. It is steady. It does not need reassurance because it is not waiting for permission from circumstances. The promise of this teaching is not that everything will happen quickly, but that everything will happen correctly. Timing, when understood properly, becomes power rather than punishment. The very delay that the mind resists often becomes the reason the outcome is stable, embodied, and irreversible when it arrives. What you're about to understand is not why some people succeed later by accident, but why the rare ones succeed later by law. And once this clicks into place, the idea of being behind begins to dissolve. Not because you are catching up, but because you realize you were never off course to begin with. Clocks don't create outcomes. States do. The moment you truly begin to question time, something subtle but powerful starts to loosen inside the mind. Most people never question it. They accept clocks, calendars, and age as causal forces, as if numbers themselves generate success or failure. Yet when you look closely, time has never created anything. It has never healed a wound, produced a breakthrough, or delivered a desire. Time only reveals what is already alive beneath the surface. What actually determines outcomes is the state of consciousness being occupied while time appears to move. Neville spoke relentlessly about the timelessness of consciousness, not as philosophy, but as lived reality. He insisted that what you are aware of being is what expresses itself, regardless of the hour on the clock. Consciousness does not wait for permission from age, and it does not consult deadlines before it moves. The body may register years, but awareness itself does not accumulate rust. It simply shifts states. When the state changes, the world rearranges to reflect it, and time is merely the stage on which this rearrangement becomes visible. A useful way to feel this, rather than merely understand it, is to imagine a film paused at different frames. Each frame shows a different moment, yet the entire story already exists. The beginning, the middle, and the ending are all present simultaneously on the reel. What you call now is simply the frame you are currently observing. Moving to a later scene does not require the story to be written again. It only requires a shift in position. In the same way, your life is not being created moment by time. It is being revealed moment by state. Age and deadlines, then, are not rulers of fate. They are effects of assumption. If someone believes deeply that success must occur by a certain age, that belief becomes a lens through which experience is filtered. Pressure increases, decisions become distorted, and identity tightens around fear. But remove the assumption, and the pressure dissolves. The clock has no authority on its own. It only reflects the meaning you have assigned to it. When that meaning changes, the emotional weight of time collapses with it. Neville went even further and stated something that feels radical until it is deeply contemplated. Creation is finished. This does not mean that events are mechanically predetermined in a fatalistic sense. It means that every possible state already exists as a potential experience. Nothing is waiting to be invented. Nothing is struggling to come into being. The only movement required is the movement of awareness from one state to another. Time does not produce the state. The state selects the moment. When this is seen clearly, the idea of being late begins to unravel. Late compared to what exactly? Compared to whose frame in the film? Compared to which assumption? If time were truly the cause, then effort alone would guarantee results, and patience would be irrelevant. But reality shows the opposite. Some labor endlessly and see nothing, while others shift inwardly and watch life reorganize with surprising ease. The difference is not the number of years invested, it is the state being lived from. And so, if time is not the cause, then the word late cannot mean what the world insists it means. It cannot mean failure. It cannot mean missed opportunity. It must point to something else entirely, something quieter and more precise, something that has nothing to do with clocks and everything to do with readiness. What takes longer is often deeper. There is a quiet intelligence in the way life unfolds that the impatient mind rarely respects. The world celebrates speed because speed is visible, measurable, and easy to compare, yet depth works differently. Depth forms in silence. It develops away from attention, beyond applause, and outside of linear expectation. When success appears later in life, it is often labeled as delay, but from a deeper perspective, it is more accurately described as ripening. Something has been allowed to mature fully before being expressed. Neville's concept of the appointed hour speaks directly to this hidden maturation. An appointed hour is not arbitrary. It is not a punishment for doubt, nor is it a reward for endurance. It is the natural moment when the inner state and the outer world reach harmony. Until that harmony exists, forcing visibility produces fragile results. The delay that frustrates the intellect is often the very space in which stability is being formed. Nothing is being withheld. Something is being prepared. Consider the difference between slow-grown hardwood and fast-grown softwood. Both are called wood, and both may look similar at first glance, yet their internal structure is entirely different. Hardwood grows slowly, developing dense fibers and deep resilience. Softwood grows quickly, appearing impressive early on, but lacking the same strength under pressure. When weight is applied, one holds and the other bends or breaks. Late success often mirrors hardwood. It carries a density of identity that can support what arrives. Inner preparation determines outer timing, because the world can only reflect what has been integrated. If an identity is not yet stable, if self-concept is fragmented, or if belief is conditional, then rapid success becomes a strain rather than a gift. Life does not rush to give what cannot yet be held. This is not resistance. It is intelligence. The unseen work happening during delay is often the strengthening of the inner structure that will one day carry the visible result. Neville was clear that delay is not denial, yet this distinction is rarely felt emotionally. Denial feels final. Delay feels ambiguous. It invites interpretation, and interpretation is where doubt often enters. But in Neville's framework, denial would mean the desire does not exist in consciousness at all. Delay means it exists fully, but the state required to sustain it is still forming. The desire is alive, active, and moving, even when nothing appears to be happening. This reframes the idea of later success entirely. What appears late is often aligned. What appears slow is often exact. The mind wants proof before faith, but life responds to faith before proof. When success finally arrives after a long, quiet period, it often feels sudden, yet it also feels natural, as if it could not have happened any other way. That sense of inevitability is the signature of ripeness, and this raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. If delay is not failure, and ripening is not punishment, then why do so many people abandon their desires just before this natural maturation completes? Why do they walk away when the structure is almost strong enough to support the very thing they have been waiting for? If this is resonating, stay with the appointed hour. Subscribe. Nothing is happening, but everything is forming. There is a phase in every meaningful transformation that feels deeply uncomfortable to the rational mind. It is the phase where effort no longer produces visible feedback, where enthusiasm fades, and where silence replaces momentum. This is the moment most people misinterpret as failure. They look around, see no evidence of change, and conclude that nothing is working. Yet this conclusion is rarely accurate. More often it is simply premature. Neville described faith as loyalty to an unseen reality, and this loyalty is tested most severely when the outer world offers no confirmation. Faith without evidence is not passive hope. It is sustained inner agreement in the absence of reinforcement. The silent phase is not empty. It is densely active beneath the surface, even though the senses register nothing. This is where the mind is tempted to renegotiate, to lower expectations, or to abandon the assumption entirely. The analogy of seeds underground captures this perfectly. When a seed is placed into the soil, it does not immediately announce itself. There is no visible progress for a time. To the untrained eye, the ground looks unchanged, even dead. But beneath the surface, the seed is breaking apart, reorganizing, and sending roots downward before it ever reaches upward. If it were dug up daily to check its progress, it would never mature. Its growth depends on being left undisturbed. The silent interval is the point at which belief is purified. Early excitement can coexist with doubt, but prolonged silence exposes what is truly being assumed. If belief depends on constant reassurance, it collapses when reassurance disappears. Rare ones do not persist because they are stubborn or emotionally numb. They persist because their sense of reality has shifted inward. They are no longer waiting for permission from appearances to continue believing. This is where the path narrows. Most people turn back not because the desire is wrong, but because the silence feels personal. It feels like rejection, as though life itself has responded with indifference. Yet silence is not rejection. It is neutrality. It is the space in which inner alignment either stabilizes or dissolves. What remains during this phase is not effort, but identity. The rare ones do not keep going by forcing optimism. They keep going because something in them has already decided. The desire is no longer an experiment. It is an accepted fact. When belief reaches this depth, the absence of evidence loses its power to destabilize. The silence becomes less threatening, even familiar. It is no longer interpreted as a warning sign, but as a natural part of the process. This is why persistence at this stage does not feel like strain. It feels like continuity. The inner conversation remains consistent even when the outer world is quiet. And this consistency is not about doing more. It is about being something different. What looks like patience from the outside is, from the inside, simply coherence. They stop renegotiating the vision. At a certain point, persistence stops being visible as effort and starts revealing itself as quiet certainty. This is where the rare ones diverge most clearly from the rest, not through dramatic discipline or relentless action, but through inner consistency. They reach a moment where the vision is no longer something they keep revisiting to see if it still feels possible. It becomes settled, and once it is settled inwardly, it no longer requires constant negotiation. Neville referred to this quality with simple but uncompromising language. Remain faithful. He did not mean blind repetition or forced belief. He meant remaining inwardly loyal to what has been assumed as true, regardless of temporary appearances. Most people unknowingly renegotiate their desires every time circumstances fluctuate. When things look promising, belief feels easy. When things slow down, belief is revised, softened, or quietly withdrawn. The assumption is no longer held firmly. It is placed back on the table for debate. The rare ones stop doing this, not because they are stubborn, but because the decision has moved beneath the level of argument. An analogy that captures this state is holding a reservation without calling the restaurant every hour to confirm it still exists. Once the reservation is made, constant checking does not improve the outcome. It only signals doubt. The certainty lies in knowing that the agreement has already been established, even if the table has not yet been seen. Consistency, in this sense, quietly outperforms intensity. Intensity often spikes and collapses. It burns brightly and then exhausts itself. Consistency, however, does not depend on emotional highs. It operates through stability. A steady assumption held over time reshapes identity, and identity is what life ultimately reflects. When belief becomes part of who you are, rather than something you practice occasionally, it no longer requires motivation to sustain it. This is why the rare ones appear calm where others appear restless. They are not suppressing doubt through effort. Doubt simply has less room to operate because the assumption has become familiar. The vision is no longer treated as a fragile idea that must be protected from disappointment. It is treated as an accepted reality that has not yet introduced itself outwardly. That distinction changes everything. Faith at this depth is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not demand signs. It does not rush the process. It simply remains. And remaining faithful does not mean clinging tightly. It means not undoing what has already been decided. The inner agreement stays intact even when the outer world offers reasons to reconsider. This is where confusion often arises, because from the outside this stability can look like passivity. The absence of urgency can be mistaken for disengagement. The lack of visible struggle can be misread as indifference. But what is actually happening is far more powerful. The vision has stopped being renegotiated, and when that happens, it begins to harden into inevitability. Waiting is outer, faith is inner. There is a subtle but crucial misunderstanding around the idea of waiting that quietly drains power from belief. Waiting, as most people experience it, is an outward posture. It is the feeling of standing still while life moves elsewhere. It carries tension, anticipation, and often a trace of desperation. Faith, however, operates on an entirely different level. Faith is not about holding time at bay. It is about inner stability, regardless of time. Neville's idea of living in the end dissolves the emotional strain associated with waiting. To live in the end does not mean pretending the outer world has already changed. It means allowing the inner experience of fulfillment to become natural now. When fulfillment is internalized, urgency fades because urgency is born from lack. The moment lack dissolves inwardly, waiting loses its psychological grip. The analogy of packing for a trip before the taxi arrives captures this inner shift clearly. Packing does not make the taxi come faster, yet it completely changes the feeling of anticipation. Once packed, the body relaxes. There is no scrambling, no last-minute panic, no constant checking of the clock. The mind knows it is ready. In the same way, inner fulfillment signals readiness to life, not through action, but through emotional completeness. When faith is present, the nervous system is calm. This calm is not resignation. It is coherence. It reflects a settled assumption rather than a hopeful wish. Urgency disappears not because the desire has been abandoned, but because it has been integrated. The desire no longer feels like something missing. It feels like something accounted for. And what is accounted for internally does not provoke restlessness. This is why calm is such a precise indicator of alignment. Excitement can exist alongside doubt, but calm rarely does. Calm arises when the mind is no longer arguing with reality. It signals that the inner conversation has stabilized. From this state, actions, if they occur, feel natural rather than compensatory. They are not attempts to fix a perceived absence. They are expressions of an already assumed fullness. Faith, then, is not the act of waiting for something to happen. It is the state of being untroubled by when it happens. The outer world may still appear unchanged, but the inner environment has shifted. And because life reflects inner conditions with remarkable fidelity, this shift quietly reorganizes the sequence of events without strain. This distinction explains why some people exhaust themselves while others seem carried. The exhausted ones are waiting outwardly, measuring time, monitoring progress, and reacting emotionally to delays. The carried ones are anchored inwardly. They are not counting days. They are occupying a state. And from that state, time becomes secondary, almost irrelevant because the outcome no longer feels distant. Sleep removes the clock. As the day fades and the body begins to soften, something remarkable happens to the mind. The sharp edges of logic dull, the constant measuring of time relaxes, and awareness slips into a quieter mode. Neville understood this state deeply and referred to it as the state akin to sleep, not as a mystical abstraction, but as a practical gateway. In this state, the mind becomes receptive, less argumentative, and far less concerned with how long things are taking. During waking hours, the intellect is vigilant. It counts, compares, and evaluates. It asks how, when, and why not yet. But as consciousness drifts towards sleep, these questions lose their urgency. The sense of time begins to loosen, and with it, the emotional pressure attached to delay. This is why Neville placed such importance on feeling the wish fulfilled before sleep. In this softened condition, the mind stops policing reality and starts accepting impressions more readily. The analogy of removing the hands from a ticking watch illustrates this perfectly. As long as the hands are visible, attention is drawn to movement, to seconds passing, to the idea that something is late or early. Remove the hands, and the watch no longer provokes anxiety. Time does not disappear, but its psychological dominance fades. SATS works in the same way. It does not eliminate time, it removes time's emotional authority. When the wish is felt as fulfilled in this state, impatience dissolves naturally. There is no forcing, no repetition driven by fear, no effort to convince. The feeling arises gently, often quietly, and settles into the subconscious as a lived reality rather than a hopeful image. This is why Neville emphasized feeling rather than visualization. Feeling implies acceptance. It signals that the mind has stopped arguing and started agreeing. In this agreement, the vision is protected not from external interference, but from internal sabotage. Time pressure often causes people to revisit their assumptions during the day, to doubt them, revise them, or dilute them. The nightly impression acts as a stabilizing force, recentering the inner state before the intellect resumes its activity. Each night becomes a return to coherence, a reminder that nothing is missing. Neville described this process as sealing inevitability. Once an assumption is impressed upon the subconscious without resistance, it begins to express itself through natural sequences of events. These events are not forced. They unfold in ways that feel ordinary, even accidental, yet they are precise. The mind later calls them coincidences, but they are simply the outward echo of an inward agreement made in stillness. As impatience fades, something else quietly takes its place: expectancy without tension. There is no countdown, no inner demand for speed. The vision feels safe, intact, and alive, even without visible confirmation. And it is from this protected inner environment that the next phase naturally emerges, not through effort, but through alignment. It looks slow until it's instant. What often confuses the observing mind is not the arrival of success, but the manner in which it arrives. After long periods of stillness, when nothing appears to be changing, movement seems to happen all at once. To the outside observer, it looks sudden, even miraculous. Yet from within the process, nothing about it is abrupt. It is the natural release of accumulated alignment, reaching a point of expression. Neville described this unfolding through what he called the bridge of incidents. This bridge is not dramatic, and it is rarely recognizable while it is being crossed. It consists of ordinary events, subtle shifts, and seemingly unrelated moments that quietly reorganize reality. Each incident feels small, even insignificant, until the final outcome appears and the pattern becomes visible in hindsight. What seemed random reveals itself as precise. The analogy of ice melting captures this threshold perfectly. Ice does not soften gradually at first glance. Its temperature rises incrementally while remaining solid, unchanged in appearance. Degree after degree, nothing seems to happen. Then, at the exact point where the internal condition shifts, the structure collapses and water appears instantly. The change feels sudden, but it was prepared by every unseen degree before it. This is how late success often unfolds. For a long time, the inner work accumulates quietly. Beliefs stabilize, identity matures, faith deepens without spectacle. Then one day, movement occurs. A conversation opens. An opportunity appears. A decision crystallizes. To others, it looks like luck or timing. To the one who has remained faithful, it feels inevitable. Breakthroughs rarely announce their approach. They do not warm up the room or send advance notice. They emerge when the inner state has reached coherence, strong enough to support expression. This is why long periods of invisibility often precede dramatic change. The invisibility was not empty time, it was formative time. Neville reminded students that growth is cumulative. Nothing is lost. No moment of faith is wasted. No quiet assumption disappears. Each one adds weight to the state being occupied. When that state becomes dominant enough, the world reorganizes quickly, not because it is rushing, but because resistance has fallen away. This suddenness is what makes late success appear deceptive. It gives the illusion that nothing mattered until the final moment, but the truth is the opposite. Everything mattered. Every silent day contributed. Every moment of inward loyalty reinforced the structure. The arrival feels instant, only because the preparation was invisible. And this reveals something crucial. What arrives this way does not wobble. It does not feel tentative or borrowed. It arrives with a sense of solidity, as though it has always belonged. This is why success that comes later often carries a different quality, one that does not need constant defense or validation. It stands on a foundation built quietly, long before anyone noticed movement at all. Speed without identity is fragile. Some outcomes arrive quickly and yet feel strangely unstable, as if they require constant effort just to remain in place. On the surface, these early wins look impressive. They appear efficient, accelerated, even enviable, but beneath them, there is often a quiet strain, a sense that something must be guarded, managed, or repeatedly proven. This instability does not come from bad luck or external pressure. It comes from a mismatch between result and identity. Neville emphasized the stability of state over the speed of results, because a state is what sustains an experience once it arrives. A state is not excitement, motivation, or a temporary belief. It is a settled position of consciousness, a way of being that feels natural and unforced. When something manifests before this state has stabilized, the outer world moves faster than the inner one. The individual then tries to hold the result together with effort, rather than allowing it to rest on identity. The image of a house built without a foundation makes this clear. Walls can go up quickly, rooms can look complete, and from a distance the structure may seem finished. But without a deep foundation, even minor pressure exposes weakness. The house requires constant repair, not because it was built badly, but because it was built too soon. Early success often follows the same pattern. It arrives before the inner groundwork has fully formed. Fast results frequently lack inner support. Without a corresponding shift in self-concept, the person does not feel internally aligned with what has appeared. This creates anxiety and over-control. Success feels conditional, as though it could disappear at any moment. Instead of living from the outcome, the mind becomes preoccupied with maintaining it. The result feels external rather than embodied. Late success carries a different quality. By the time it arrives, identity has already adjusted. Beliefs have stabilized. Faith has matured beyond excitement into quiet certainty. The outcome does not feel new, it feels familiar. There is no scramble to catch up internally because the inner shift happened first. The external change simply reflects what has already been established within. This is why late success is often durable and self-sustaining. It does not require constant reassurance or vigilance. It feels owned rather than borrowed. The individual is not growing into the result. The result is growing out of who they already are. Seen this way, speed loses its authority. What endures is not what arrives first, but what arrives supported by a stable state.